Here we go.
Okay.
Gurus and polarity coaches and lions and tigers and bears. Oh my.
Oh my.
So you and I talked about the arc of this, but for those people who watch this in the future, the general arc of this is we're going to talk about gurus and cults and trance dependencies and giving your power away and some of the things within that. And we're going to shift and land it with polarity coaches and some of the things we see going on today in the polarity coach world in particular, but also with a lot of coaches and transformational leaders and light workers and those who aren't into, anything but good vibes. So I think you have a lot more experience with cults than I do.
Why would you say that? Because I was raised in one?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. That might have been one of the. So would you be willing to, share some of the dynamics you saw at play? Some of the warnings, because some of them were more subtle than others. Some of the warning signs, maybe. And what you experienced in terms of what was going on for you, so that other people can recognize it for themselves. And then what you did. We didn't talk about any of this, but if you're willing, if you're willing to go there, I think it would be.
Pose myself.
Well, for the benefit, in service of others. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Always. Absolutely, yeah. And always. So I grew up in what is called Church Universal and Triumphant. I was born in 1980 into the church. My parents have been members for a while. They're a branch off from kind of a sort of the I Am movement. So some of their tenets is that they believed in what is known as the ascension process. They had a whole host of ascended masters that they believed had been incarnated different entities throughout history, and that their guru, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, was the one and only messenger who had the ability to channel these messages from the ascended masters to direct the course of not only the organization, but quite arrogantly and hopefully of the course of humanity. They truly believed that they were capable and able to influence the course of history.
All right.
So that's what it was about.
Got it.
Warning signs of any cult. There are some core tenets to cult control. They want to, they control community. They control who you have access to, the information that you have access to. Their goal is to essentially create an echo chamber in which only their opinion and doctrine is viable. So you want to pay attention to the silencing of other opinions and the demonification in particular of other sources of information. So there's one. They typically want to control sleep. They want to control diet. They want to control you sexually. So thought, sleep, diet, sexuality, and then of course, your sort of spiritual foundation. So as is typical with lots of organizations, the sexuality was very much this kind of 50s. You use the word milquetoast. I love it. Like, you can't get any more fucking milquetoast than this, right? Like it's only supposed to be hetero. It's only supposed to be like very like traditional. Like, you're not supposed to even mix like body parts, like upper and lower chakra regions, if you get what I mean. Like, that was all forbidden, as of course was being gay or bi. They created entire like mythologies around people who were opposed to their agendas being these grand figures in history who had like one of like the Livingston Enterprise people, for example, had been like the person who had brought homosexuality to the planet. So you want to pay attention for these. Oh yeah, it was totally a thing. And this was bad. This was like seventh circle of hell, bad. So you want to pay attention to the demonification of anybody else's ideology over your own. You want to pay attention to the sort of mixing of politics and religion. They were very much right-wing in their belief system. So you want to pay attention to anybody who wants to control you sexually, to the creation of echo chambers. So the filtering out of information is core to any cult practice, because they want their doctrine to be supreme, to be really anything that came off of the altar that was given in dictation was basically the word of the ascended master, was infallible and was above reproach, much like the word of the Pope. So I personally think, I think the Catholic Church is kind of a cult. I think the majority of religions should be considered cults because they promote this echo chamber mentality. So
Church of Latter-day Saints, they have the same infallible prophet.
Absolutely.
You're not allowed to know until you've been in the church for a certain period of time. And, the vilification, I know you said demonization or demonic. I'll say vilification of, anything outside. Yeah.
And I say demonization in the instance of the organization I was in, because they actually created these mythologies where these people were fallen angels. So it was literal demonification.
My parents were in a fundamentalist Christian church, Protestant church, and they thought that dinosaur bones were like. So first of all, I never expected to meet one of these people, let alone have it be my mother. Thought that dinosaur bones were planted by the devil to tempt us into believing that the earth really wasn't created in 7 days, 6,000 years ago.
Right.
Except, carbon dating or whatever. But there's this whole mythology around how it must have been Satan tempting our faith. I'm like, or, they didn't have carbon dating, or it was a metaphor, right? Like, or the Old Testament was a metaphor.
Yeah.
So, we can see traces of everything that you talked about in most religions, which is, I think, what you were alluding to. Like, most organized religion have some more than others. Not all of them have that infallible central or highest prophet. But some of them do. Some of them are centrally organized. A lot of them are independent. But they do have varying degrees of the same kind of thing. I'm just always suspicious of anybody who wants to give. So I've noticed I've never been around cults, or maybe some were called that, but I was so much on the periphery, I never saw the behavior. Because generally it wasn't exposed around me. But I noticed two things from stories that people tell me. One, and just in general from things I've read and what I've heard. One is the locus of power. Where's the locus of power? And if they want the locus of power, if they want you to give away all your power to them, whether it's a guru running, talking about you need, it's your ego that's conflicting with him or her, rather than you have a genuine concern. And then their ego wants to sort of squash yours. And it comes from a very egocentric place, I think. The other is sexual misconduct. Man, there's a lot of sexual misconduct among cults. Now, it seems it may have been the opposite in the one you were in, but the ones I've or not, huh? As long as the prophet endorsed it.
I would actually say it was more of one of those exception to the rules kind of things, where because of her position of power and authority, she took it upon herself to be more of an intimate influence in people's lives than she had any fucking business being. And
Yeah.
you have to look at these things as a co-arising dynamic. Like it's one thing to pin all the blame on the cult leader, but these people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people are showing up and agreeing to play in this dynamic. So it's a co-arising dynamic, just as it is with a narcissist and the empath. It's you have this person who you are projecting your power and authority onto, and they're like, yeah, sure, I'll suck that up and like become this monstrous sort of figure in people's psyche, if not actually literally. You were talking about the locus of power. The consolidation of resources is another one to pay attention to with the cult tenants. That's almost always something that's happening.
Give your entire inheritance to the church. That's what right. Or give up your worldly possessions and come live with the church, or sell them all and give the proceeds to the church. Or, I mean, I've seen people, or I know secondhand of people who were talked out of their trust funds or inheritance to really show their commitment to the cause, right?
So with our church, because it was a doomsday cult as well, people were giving up.
Oh
yeah. People, how charming, right?
Oh gosh.
People were giving up their inheritances and like savings in order to secure places in the bomb shelters. These very limited, exclusive bomb shelter seats.
So when we look at, and I think most televangelists now have been discredited to some degree, or they've had scandals that have been, or they're just not, or they're not behaving in a Christ-like way, like they're, and they're acquiring so much wealth, and I have to ask, I'm not sure, and I don't think it really matters. Like a doomsday cult, do they really believe fervently in that, or is it just a scam? Not that it really matters. Like at the end of the day, you should get out of it either way. But I'm wondering, are they delusional, or are they just grifters? Mm-hmm. Or I don't know where that line is. And again, it doesn't matter. It's like somebody who's gaslighting you. It doesn't matter if it's intentional or if they're schizophrenic. You need to get away from them.
So I think the delusion it's a shared delusion. So with the church, I'm not sure exactly when the whole like doomsday scenario started happening, but as it was handed down from the dictation stage, it became woven in as doctrine as part of the church, right? So what I heard after the fact is that there was like at one point there was like specific dictations that were given that were like along the lines that California was going to fall into the sea, which is an old Edgar Casey prophet. And this is all happening conveniently as the church is moving its headquarters to Paradise Valley, Montana. So it's like these messages are given in this sort of from this mythological, manipulative place in which I think, depending on the degree of like sort of the grandeur, the delusion of grandeur that this person has about themselves, that she had about herself, she believed herself to be Guinevere reincarnated from Camelot. And
of course, well, I mean,
naturally. and her head honcho ascended master had been King Arthur, and like as like narratives would shift within the community as to who was after her, like they would become the Mordred. And it was like, this was part of the doctrine of the church. Did she actually believe it? I think she kind of possibly did. Her daughter wrote a book about it as well called The Prophet's Daughter. And she really takes accountability for her position is also acting as sort of like a follow-up messenger at the time and channeling these messages, and like the sort of the confusion of wanting the approval of her mother and wanting to do the right thing and sort of being under that kind of trance herself is really quite moving, because she's older than I am, but not she would have been a young woman when all of this was happening. Like to be under the degree of that kind of influence would be really pressing on a person's psyche, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
So I think it's both.
Yeah. I think it's important. I think the other thing that it requires is for you to ignore your own intuition, like your own like sense of knowing. And I think anybody, and it doesn't matter who it is, if something feels off about them, and then they want to make it about something you need to resolve. Maybe 1 out of 100 times that might be the case. Like it's triggering something from the past. It's not really real, or you're projecting a bunch of stuff onto them. Okay. I mean, it's entirely possible. But in general, I'd say trust yourself. Like trust your own intuition about whether or not something feels off or not. And I think that's one of the things they want you to give away. They want you to give away the trust in your own internal knowing, your own center. One of my favorite translations of the word guru, and this shows you how far we've fallen from really true spirituality, or performative spirituality versus authentic spirituality, is that guru means one who is solid within themselves.
Wow.
So the vicissitudes of life don't blow them over, like the winds of change, so one who is solid within themselves. And so any guru that wants you to give the power is a false guru, and they should be working to have you find your own inner guru-ness, like to have your locus of power be within you. They should be working to liberate you, to free you, and to make themselves obsolete. Like, like the 5th or 6th time you show up, it'd be like, what are you doing here? Go. Like, I remember a friend of mine, he was living in an ashram and he was actually kicked out. They said, no, you need to go live in the real world. Like you've been here too long. And I was like, yeah, now we're talking. It was some Zen-based place, and they were clear he had become addicted to. And I think there's a lot of state-based addiction that goes on. The trance that's woven by the crowd or by the leader or by that, and not that that's not useful sometimes. I mean, choose your trances carefully. Everything's kind of a trance, like songs or thoughts or. But when they're intentionally weaving that for the purpose of sales or for the purpose of, it gets very, very dangerous. And I think it's something to be on guard about.
This is another one of the things that the church did that I was a part of. They created this, they were called decrees, which are basically like rapidly spoken like prayers that they made up the words to. And they would definitely get people into an altered state by just the nature of the way that it was done. It was very sure. Monotone, right? And faster and faster. And it would create these states. And then the dictation would be given once these people were tired, controlled their sleep, were sort of probably hungry because they would do it for long periods of time without eating, control their food. And then susceptible because they're tired and hungry. I tell my clients all the time, like, do you want to break a trance state ever? It's like you need to check with your breath. You need to make sure you're hydrated. You need to make sure that you're properly nourished. And like once your basics are taken care of, you can start to shift trance states pretty easily. Otherwise, you're going to be susceptible to whatever anybody is sort of suggesting to you.
That's right. And I think it does take a while to become sensitive to the nature of whether or not somebody's of service to you,
Well, even with like the Catholic Church, or even with these more sort of traditionally accepted sort of Christian things, that there's a lot of ritual that's built into it that sort of, it it creates the sort of the scene for the myth to take place, so that you feel like you're taking part of something that's bigger than yourself, and that's really appealing to people. We want to feel like there's something bigger than ourselves. There is. It's called the great big fucking wide world that we live in as adults. Like, it's a pretty cool place to be. But all of that, and you see it with these big, like some, like I've never attended a landmark thing. I co-taught a system called Matrix Energetics with my father, where they create these big group states to sort of fuel the results that you're not going to be able to reproduce on your own, because it's a state-based experience, like you were saying.
That's right. That's right. And I think a lot of people, when people go to large workshops like that, or weekend seminars, or large groups, they confuse states with stages. And one of the things that goes on is they're in this state for 3 days, and they're like, "Yeah, I've transformed my life." And then they go out in the world, and then it fades after like 3 days, maybe 3 weeks if they've had some practices, and so there's no integration. The state fades, and they shame themselves for not transforming their life in a weekend, or whatever it is, because they haven't put any practices into place. I mean, Landmark's a little better about that than other places now at least, but they've always given away a 10-week course included with the forum to help you integrate the stuff that you learned. And I think that's really valuable. And they include it because they want to make sure you actually integrate the distinctions. And I think it's important after any workshop to have community, have structures in place, have coaching, whatever it may be. I think it's just important because there's no way you integrated something over a weekend, but you will have that state-based high. And it's just, important to watch out for that and acknowledge it for what it is. It's okay to experience it. Just don't think it's actual change.
Right.
It's a state, and you can access that state, but it's not integrated change or a new stage of development.
Well, and that's so much also the case with doing these sort of psychedelic journeys as well, right? Like you can create a state, you can have a experience, but Clarissa Pinkola Estes said something beautiful. She said the practicality of the phenomena itself should not exceed the practicality of the experience. So if you can go off in the jungle, you can do whatever medicine you're going to do, but the practicality is when you come home, like how does that benefit your life, your relationships? Can we read this comment over here so we interact with our people?
Oh, yes. I don't have the...
Oh, you don't see them? Okay.
I do now. I didn't have the panel open. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Tracy is asking me how and when my mom severed ties with the church because a dear friend of his joined, and he had visited, was introduced to Guru Ma. She explained the doomsday prophecy existed before they moved to the church to Paradise Valley. She explained that she was told to move there and build a network of bomb shelters. They tried their best to convince me to join and move there with my children. The level of pressure and brainwashing witnessed was clear, and you never returned to visit your friend. I'm sorry you had that experience with your friend. That's part of creating the echo chamber, is if you can't get somebody to join the system, then you kind of vilify them, and you train your people to do the same thing. It's like if anybody who cares about you is questioning what you're doing, you just don't understand because you're not part of the divine plan. It creates this very special elitist mentality. And specifically, the members of the church were called light bearers. We all had very special missions. So we left in 1996. My mom moved to MSU to go back to school. And I don't know, it's kind of funny, like living on staff. Like my moment of disillusion with the church was when I was 9 years old. And we came out from surviving what was supposed to be the Armageddon night, and all the adults were congratulating themselves on how their decrees, so also pay attention for magical thinking, had diverted this Armageddon. And we're standing around this toaster in the cafeteria, and I was like, oh my God, I'm surrounded by insane fucking assholes. I'm like 9 and realizing that no one around me is safe or sane. I was like, shit.
Yeah.
What do we do? Like, as a kid, you endure. But I think the mentality, a lot of the people there is that, you know, they were willing to believe. And here's the thing with the cults, and here's the thing with also like the QAnon stuff. With any kind of conspiracy, you take a little bit of truth, you take a seed of truth, and you package it in a pack of lies. And the part of you that is the truth seeker will resonate the truth, but because the majority of people are so instinct injured, we don't recognize that the truth is being used as bait. You have to have those core intuition and instincts online, like you were talking about, that most people have been like trained and socialized and conditioned out of, and that makes us more susceptible to all of these various forms of cults.
Can you say what instinct injured means, and how does one get conditioned out of that?
Okay. So instinct injury, we all have instincts. We all have sort of an internal kind of sensor that lets us know when someone isn't safe, when something isn't. It's like your primary instincts is like you sniff, like, does it smell good? Like, you lick, does it taste good? Do you want to eat it? Do you want to fuck it? Like, these are your primary instincts. And if they're online, like, you're going to know what's good for you, you're going to know what's not. So it begins usually in childhood, where you have an instinct about a person or about an experience that you're told you're wrong. It could be something as simple as you feel uncomfortable around, like, you feel uncomfortable around this uncle, and yet so many children are nudged or even forced into being affectionate with like relatives or with friends of the family, and like our autonomy isn't acknowledged as a sovereign physical identity when we're children. It's like people are always coming to our space and kissing on us and hugging on us, and you're like, we don't fucking know them. We don't know them, and half the time we're trying to push them away. But we're told socially that's not nice, and you need to be more accepting. That's instinct injury. That's where it starts. And it goes on, you know, it goes on into the socialization of like, once you've done it once, it's like, okay, well, like as a woman, it's like, oh no, I have a bad feeling about this guy, but I'm going to go out with him anyways and give him a chance, right? It's like, and it's habitual, it's repetitive. So you get used to shutting down that instinct, you get used to shutting down your intuition, you get used to accepting doctrine as law over your primal senses and feelings about life. And it's a lot easier to boss people around, to control them, to treat them as prey, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's so important to, you know, and I mean, you and I have access to tools that a lot of people don't. You know, and in the NLP training I'm leading right now, some of the students are like, God, the stuff that we cleared out this week, like that they were experiencing with each other, you know, most people don't even think it's possible. Traumas or, you know, fear responses or anger responses, dramatically reducing them. And I think it's, even when I work with somebody in business, we have that phase one of clearing out, you know, anger, fear, guilt, shame, sadness, the imprints from it, traumas that could be affecting them today. And I think when you clear a lot of that out, then your instrument for knowing becomes more clear, because it's not, you know, encrusted with all this garbage. It gets it really cleared out. And then, you know, our job really, like, I consider our biggest job is to just keep the channel clear for spirit, you know, like, and that could be toxic relationships or too much sugar, right? Or it's like static in the channel is the way I relate to it. All right. Let's talk about, I want to talk about these polarity coaches. Let's shift gears to, you ready?
Yeah. And if anybody else is listening and you want to drop feedback or questions or comments, please, we love interacting with you.
Me too. I personally love questions. So transformational leaders, and, you know, we talked a little bit about that, the dependency. Let's talk about these polarity coaches. You know, you and I have talked about how what they're offering, and I've written about how they're offering is a regression, not an expansion. Boz, I don't know if you saw he had a very similar post yesterday, I think, about like Polarity is going to look very fluid. And he and I, within 12 hours of each other, wrote it. Like he's got a very different, he's coming from a different place, but came to the same conclusion instinctively. And the thing that stuck out to me recently was when you were writing something about them using shame, and they said that shame was a good tool for, which is kind of strange to me because it's probably the worst state somebody can learn to receive in. And so, first of all, my personal opinion is that shame is useless except to control people. Different than guilt. Guilt being guilt is like an adrenaline rush. I violated my own value system, and I need to fix it. I need to make it right. Shame is, I'm therefore a bad person, and there's sort of this cloud around it, which actually slows the progress of, like, you have to move through the shame before you make it right. And also shaming somebody is the imposition of your value system onto them. So that's the way I look at shame in general. I have it that if someone's shaming you publicly as a teacher, they don't have any business being up there. And that, anything, there might be some difficult communication that needs to be delivered, but it should be delivered, clearly from a place of service, and even with a pre-frame, like, hey, this might come across as hard, but other things I've tried haven't worked, but I'm, doing it because, like, and it needs to be coming from love, and you need to carry them through that whole experience, make sure they're emotionally okay at the end of it, right? Your thoughts and opinions about these guys in general, Polarity, and then this shame piece.
I love everything. I love everything that you said. I think you're absolutely right about if shame is applied, then you actually have to move through shame in order to get to guilt, in order to find your course redirection. So it's utterly useless. The comment was that some people only learn through shame. That was the actual comment that was said by one of these alleged coaches. I say alleged because just because no, that's not okay.
I'm going to start using that. Alleged.
I also use so-called. That's my other one. So-called coaches. Spiritual leaders. So my thoughts are very much in alignment with yours on shame and guilt. And Brene Brown, who is specifically a shame researcher, says pretty much the same fucking thing. She says that shame is actually received physiologically as if it's a threat. So not only are we not likely to learn from somebody shaming us, we are actually in the part of our brain that is least capable of learning when we are in a state of shame. She says when we are in a state of shame, we should basically turn off the phone, close down the blinds, and do whatever we need to do to reset our nervous system, essentially. Because what we're likely going to do when we're in a state of shame is we're going to revert to whatever our threatened response is. And that might be fight, that might be flight, that might be freeze, or that might be fawn. So the reason that shame is considered an effective tactic by these alleged fucking coaches is because the majority, and specifically in this instance, he is preaching at women. When a woman is threatened, she is more than likely going to resort to a state of fawning, specifically if it's coming from a male authority figure. This is their ideal. They're setting them up exactly. And this state of fawning, that's their ideal for womanhood in general, which is one of my main fucking issues, is they're perpetuating the trauma bonding.
So they're not actually learning. They're putting them in a state of compliance, and they think that's them learning.
Ding, ding, ding.
Well, that's even more fucked up than I thought.
Well, this is why they blocked me all, because they're not exactly a compliant person.
Yeah, right.
But a lot of them are. And, and for anybody who doesn't understand what fawning is, it's people pleasing. So you have this authority figure as a male coach who is teaching about polarity dynamics, which is male female dynamics, right, in this very rigid format, and he is coming at you and putting you in a position where you are more than likely going to be regressed, which means you're going to be in a trance state where you're not functioning in your full adult capacity, and you're more than likely psychologically going to slip into a state of fawning. So either you fight back, which just paints a larger target on you for not only the coach to come after you, but also often for the community. Everybody else who is on their side is now coming after this other person. So if you fight back, you paint a target on yourself. If you freeze, that's probably kind of your best move in that scenario, but you're also not going to be able to discharge the energy. If you run away, then, removing yourself from the situation is a super good idea, honestly. But if you stay and you open yourself up to their education, then the only way you're actually going to be is in a state of compliance.
Yeah, it's so tricky too, because sometimes people do come with preconceived notions, and if they're coming to learn, you want them to be open to an alternative perspective, right? Now, I agree with virtually nothing that these guys talk about, so let's start there. And their tactics have gotten worse and worse. Until now, I think they're just untenable in general and abusive. But I think the way you deal with feedback, or the way you deal with challenge, like, first of all, if somebody brings something up and they challenge you, perhaps there's a miscommunication. So it's an opportunity for you as a teacher to clarify what you meant, or to tailor your communication of what you're trying to teach to their outcomes, right? And if they happen to have a habit of resisting, although I don't think there's any such thing as a resistant student, just an ineffective communicator or a uncreative coach, or like you really shouldn't relate to it as resistance, because that's inherently an authority based, like, you're resisting what I'm saying. It's like, well, then you're not communicating it effectively enough, couched to their particular desires, outcomes, or needs. If you're able to do that, there shouldn't really ever be any resistance, unless you're just thinking they're resisting your authority. But it's really an opportunity. I actually saw one of these guys even say nuance is feminine, so they weren't going to do it. I was like, all right, well, I have it that some of these things are fairly complex concepts, and you may need more than a pretty background on Facebook to say a thing, but they didn't want to explain themselves at all, and so they just discarded. And they're like, look, they're not getting it, and nuance is feminine. And so, as a guy, which I guess they think is supposed to be 100% masculine, which nobody is. And I think any good leader, and you and I have talked about this, they should equally develop masculine and feminine qualities and be able to call upon them at will. And it's all contextual, and they're sort of doing away with the whole idea of context. And I think it's sad, and I think they're doing more damage than any good they could have ever possibly done, even initially, by some of their tactics, by a misunderstanding, and by the way they're treating people. But also, just as leaders, as somebody you should be able to put your trust in, and you should be able to feel safe. Like, the shaming thing has to go. And not that there aren't difficult people sometimes, but our job is to open them enough so that they can receive things, and they have to feel safe to do that. And you have to be judicious with how much you give them at once, because you want to stretch them and expand them, but not break them. So you have to be really artful about which piece you give them when, so they can actually integrate that. I don't think these guys care about any of that shit.
No, I would agree. I think they have their model, they have their agenda, and they expect you to mold to fit it. There's no flexibility within the principles that they're offering.
Right.
And that's a problem, because then you're not communicating, because there's no give and take, there is no receiver flow. you're lecturing. And if you're lecturing at someone who isn't receptive to what you're saying, then it seems like their approach is largely like batter down the resistance,
Yeah.
which puts people in that state, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Frank or Tracy says there are many spiritual predators and abusers out there. However, how have you been able to avoid having your personal biases and prejudices skew and poison your perceptions of other spiritual practices and beliefs? You want to take that one first?
Sure. So first, I've been, cleaning myself out and developing myself for 30 years consciously. So I don't like my intuition's really attuned, and I've also got the tremendous benefit of having grown up with an alcoholic father and who was also a black belt. So the beatings were interesting. So I, like I can micro slice, so I can assess very accurately, very quickly, but I've also cleaned all that stuff out. At the same time, anytime I encounter something new, my first question is, where are they right and to what degree? Like it's as a practice, like where are they right, especially if I disagree with them, and then to what degree, and that is a practice. And so I take that on. What it does lead to certain problems because I give people more positive equity than perhaps they deserve or earn at first. But I'd rather have that problem than shut myself down to learning new perspectives, which I think we should be forever learning. And I have absolutely no problem cutting ties rapidly, cleanly, and completely with anything that feels unhealthy as a matter of self-care and a matter of self-respect. So that's how I've done that. Does that answer your question, Tracy?
I, at this point, have very few spiritual practices or beliefs that are not deeply bound to my own and others' humanity. So I tend to question the viability or the usefulness of any belief or practice that does not actually put our humanity first. And that's kind of foundational for me at this point. I just got exposed to so much spiritual bypassing, so much ascensionism, and so much of this idea that, like, as is the case with so many religions, that the point of being here is to get to somewhere else. I'm highly fucking cynical about pretty much everything spiritual. And I prefer cynicism to naivete. And if that makes me if that makes me whatever it makes me, I'm absolutely fine with living in that way. I also have a deep core connection to this planet. I love being here. I have no fucking desire to escape. So I sort of question and roll my eyes at anything that is founded in escapism, anything that's talking about escaping the body, creating emotional hierarchies, divorcing ourselves in any way from what I call the hard, holy, and human. I kind of detest it.
Yeah.
For me, when reading, when listening, when investigating anyone who is offering anything of a so-called spiritual nature, I'm checking in with my body. As I read, do I dissociate? As I listen to their voice, does my nervous system relax physiologically? Do I relax and open? Or do I shut down? Do I tense up? Do I feel uncomfortable? Do I feel unsafe? I think that primarily as either human or spiritual teachers, and we shouldn't be teaching spirituality if we're not deeply devoted to our humanity, our primary course should be about creating safety, not in a don't expand beyond your comfort zone kind of way, but in a, hey, like, you're here in a body and that needs to be like a primary concern, like having your physical needs taken care of, feeling safe in your relationships, having money is not evil, being able to meet your primary human needs and relate with other people at a human level, that needs to be core tenet to anything that's being spoken about. that makes me blind, if that gives me certain blind spots to like say channel information, I'm fucking fine with that. I can live with that.
Yeah, I don't even know that I have any spiritual beliefs, to be honest. And like I have a belief in consciousness and that which moves through me, which is greater than me, which I can't really explain. But I don't have any real spiritual beliefs beyond that. Any morality I have is based on real world results. Like this will have this consequence. This, violates this trust. This has this impact. Like it's, you don't need a spiritual belief system to know right and wrong. And there's so much, not only historical context that's no longer accurate, um, but also it was just designed to oppress certain things that at the time might have even been useful to suppress, but are no longer useful. In terms of spiritual practice, I mean, my only one is like any spiritual practice I would have doesn't require anything outside of my own body, because I don't want to create a dependency of anything external. Like I even whether they're anchors or whether they have true properties or not, I even think, like if you have an altar or a crystal that has you feel better or certain things, what happens if you lose the crystal? What happens if you, and so, and you can create those things within yourself. You don't need the external reference point. And that's, but there's so much pseudo spirituality out there that doesn't want to deal with the real world. Or, I think in one of your articles, you mentioned like, oh, good vibes only. And I'm so tired of people using that feels good there's a different texture to what feels good versus what feels right. And, some things that are the right thing to do don't feel good at all. Might make you very uncomfortable that you have to do that thing, but it's the right thing to do. And there's like for me, other people might be different. Feeling good's like a warm, but feeling right, it's like a clicking, like there's an internal, for me, like an internal, like it clicks into place.
That sense of alignment.
Yeah. Like there's a trueness to it. So,
well, that's a great question, Tracy. Do you think cynicism stagnates and stunts personal growth? I do not. I think it is a function of personal growth. I think, but I also, please understand that I also believe in innocence as our core essence. But I also think that it's really important to create a distinction between innocence and naivete. So innocence is what we have and what we are born with. And cynicism is a function of paying attention to the world and using our instincts that develops as a means of protecting it.
Yeah.
Whereas naivete is susceptible.
To me, it's not even cynicism, to be honest. It's actually having, I don't know. I mean, you and I might be looking at it differently, but to me, being discerning isn't cynical at all. And I too believe in universal innocence. I think that, there's the idea of original sin rather than universal innocence has done more to harm our nature of our spiritual selves than perhaps anything else. Like that when we're born, I'm like, no, sorry. There's innocence there. And I think you can be very well traveled in all contexts and still maintain your innocence.
Yes.
And I think that's a matter of like, there's an innocence of spirit that you can tell, like somebody's a pure spirit, no matter how promiscuous or how, well traveled or how, yes.
How foul their language is or any of those things.
That's right.
One of my issues with these polarity coaches is what I've seen in some of these conversations is that, these questions that are coming specifically, particularly from the women, because I see the women asking more questions than men, what a shock, is that there is an innocence to it. There is a curiosity there. There is a genuine desire to know. And when that is turned around and when that is manipulated and when that's used to sort of gaslight that innate intelligence that is actually curious and interested in growing, it fucking infuriates me, because it is coming from a genuine place to learn and grow and be a benefit. And when you come in with this, this preconceived notion of how a woman in particular is supposed to behave in relation to a man, and apply that to to that mode of communication, particularly using shame as an interface, shame specifically goes after our innocence.
Yeah. Yeah. Do either of you think that there are, Tracy asked, do either of you think that there are any healthy spiritual leaders guides alive and known around the globe?
Alive.
You mean internationally known ones, or do you mean other than Justice?
No.
Other than the two of them.
Other than us, no. Obviously, we're like the only ones for the only way. Clearly. Fuck.
We are co-prophets. We only only we have the true information.
We have the true religion. Give us all of your money and ascribe yourself to the Church of Bullshit.
Tracy, I've never been much of a follower or a joiner. So, the only one and he's no longer alive, but his teaching lives, like, basically they just have on video. It's just Vipassana meditation. And, it's donation based. You do a 10-day retreat. You're guided the whole time. It's really clean. They talk about, they have discourses, but it's really not, they stress it's not a religion, and the practice will free you, not Buddhism, even though it's a Buddhist practice, not Buddhism, and then, they talk about the dangers of religion. And so, that practice, which is just to observe your bodily sensations very methodically without reacting, like without scratching an itch or without, embodies a sort of stillness and equanimity. That's the only one I've found that I can absolutely advocate. But I don't know that there's any, like, you can go for fascination's sake and, go to an AMA event or go to whatever, but why? Look for find things to do. I assert the best practice or guidance would be to take on practices that clear away that which is in the way of your own knowing, and become your own guru, become your own spiritual guide, and find somebody who you can trust at a personal level to help you do that work. But I don't know about, once you get to a scale where they're internationally known, the group is so large you can't actually do deep work. It's all going to be trance anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I kind of am inclined in the same vein with that answer. It's not that I think they don't exist. It's that I think that I think the majority of it is sort of, it's trance. And with things like AMA, there's no doubt in my mind about it. The phenomena exceeds the practicality. It's you step into this state. Of course, things are going to happen when you're in this state of expectation. That, like, the shared expectation generates the phenomena.
Yes,
I think the Dalai Lama is pretty harmless as far as spiritual teaching. I can't think of any sex scandals, and I can't read that in his field. And I like the fact that he said that the world will be saved by the Western woman. Hey, what's up? He also said that if I believe he also said that if there was to be a reincarnation, that at this point it would need to be feminine. So I like the fact that he is actually talking up the feminine. Where my cynicism comes in with the name brands is that it is practically every single one of them has some sort of sexual misconduct attached to either themselves as an individual or to their organization. The article that Jason mentioned, Positive Vibes Only, The Dangers of New Age Spiritualism, is an article that I wrote that went viral, in which I addressed the fact that that what's her name? Oh, the famous Buddha Dharma lady. What's her fucking name? She was stepping down out of her position at Shambhala because of the sexual misconduct that was illegitimately addressed in that organization. Pema Chodron. I think she seems pretty clean. I mean, I think Buddha Dharma as a practice is pretty good because it doesn't actually elevate. It's not about elevating the Buddha. It's about practicing honesty and accountability with yourself and within your relationships. One of the tenets is it's not just about navel gazing. It is actually about turning what you find within yourself and showing up in the world to be of benefit. It's one of the reasons that I actually write for Elephant Journal is because Waylon Lewis is a Buddha Dharma brat, and I find the practice of the practice of something is always more important than the theology itself, because you can have a theology that you don't live, you can have a philosophy that you believe in, but if you don't embody it, then what's the fucking point?
So Tracy says, I've heard you say that neither of you are spiritual. First of all, hold on. I didn't mean to communicate that. When I say things like, my job is to keep the channel clear for spirit, it's why I don't drink. It's why I don't eat sugar. It's why I keep toxic, because I, most of what I write is inspired and it comes out in one sitting in the order in which I write it. Now, I don't put some mythological thing there. I think it's, but there is something that moves through me that's greater than me. And for me, my spiritual purpose, which is to accelerate the evolution of consciousness on the planet, is my replacement for God. So now I just don't have spiritual beliefs as in there's somebody I pray to, but I have no problem with prayer. Like, hey, if you want to pray for me, please, sending positive thoughts my way. Awesome. But I'm definitely not religious, and I don't follow any spiritual leader or teacher. I have spiritual practices. So I want to make that distinction there. And then the rest of the question, would you say that you lean more towards agnostic and or atheist ideals? I agree that everyone is their own guru. However, I also believe that many, if not all of us, can be helped by guidance from other people.
Well, if I didn't think we couldn't be guided by other people, I wouldn't be a fucking guide. So
I was going to say, it's my business.
If I didn't actually believe to the core in my bones and what I fucking do, I wouldn't be a guide.
I mean, I'm actually an evolutionary guide, not a coach. Like that's my my self-ascribed title, because I'm guiding people through stages of development. That's actually what I do, is accelerate movement through stages. So yeah, but I also, like, it's in my FAQ, my job, like, will we work together longer than 7 months? No, probably not. I want to make myself obsolete. And it's right. Like, I feel like my job, like my ultimate goal is to make myself obsolete. And so we shouldn't need more than one contract. Like we're going to work together for a period of time. And then I've had clients circle back years later to work on a completely different thing. Or maybe we work for a little bit longer because there's one outcome we didn't quite get. Or maybe they take a course. But, I think that everybody, needs guidance. I think the more developed you get, the more difficult it is to have somebody add a perspective you hadn't thought of. And you can think of as any good guide as somebody who can offer you perspectives you hadn't thought of to expand your view, or to expand the perspectives from which you're looking at an issue. And some people, they're great mentors in that they've done things and been successful in areas that you haven't yet. And so you're looking to accelerate whether it's starting a business or whether it's what works and what doesn't work in a relationship. So absolutely, you can find people who can guide you. You just want to make sure that they're of clean motivation, that they want to help you for your sake. They're engaged in servant leadership. Like, what do you want? How can I help you get that? And that they're not creating a dependency on you. Be very cautious of anybody who can't teach you what they do or explain to you what they're doing, and they make it magical or mystical. And because that's a subtle way to create a dependency. Like, well, you can only get it from me. So just be aware of that. It was a lot. I just said a lot.
It was important, though. It was well said, especially that last piece about the magical thinking, the magical phenomenon. Yeah, we just need to be able to be broken down into process. What we said, the practicality needs to exceed the phenomena of it. I say I'm not spiritual, right? Energy work. I say I'm not spiritual in the sense that I don't adhere to any specific tenet or religious or even spiritual belief system. I have been literally raised in this, so I feel saturated in spirit. My life is devoted to spirit through my living experience of that, and particularly with other humans, which is why I work with people as a guide. I would say, if anything, I would consider myself most inclined towards Gnosticism, because the philosophy of it is so much about direct experience, and it really ties in really nicely with what I do, and that the purpose of our existence here is to co-awaken with the planetary intelligence and to actually support each other in our awakening, as well as to gain the boost and the love and the support of the planet, and to love and nurture and act as stewards for the planet herself. That works for me. And there's nothing that is outside of my direct experience. Not to say that I haven't had what people would call paranormal experiences, but I don't believe in the supernatural. I believe in the natural world, and that there are things that we can see and that we can interface with. And some of us have a more refined sensing apparatus than others. And we're able to see and we're able to sense and we're able to feel more. And if we're really fucking blessed, we can articulate that shit. So I do my best to articulate what I can see and what I can sense and I can feel. Is it the ultimate truth? I don't think so. But it's my experience. And it comes through a lot of thought, and it comes through a lot of curiosity and exploration, and looking not only for what do I believe, but how does it function? How is it practical? How can it be of benefit? I just don't see the point of spirituality otherwise. And I will create rituals. I will create spontaneous rituals. I created one recently where I took some things that had been gifted to me and smoked and wrote, and I'll burn things, and it's like I'm 100% into doing ritual. Even my morning coffee is a ritual. It is an act of devotion and care to myself and to life. I'll sit and I'll write a lot as I have my coffee. I think ritual is one of the ways that we can intentionally bring spirit, that consciousness, the essence of life, into the physical. But does it need to be dogmatized? Does it need to be stuck into some coda that needs to be performed in such and such a way at such and such a time? I don't think it does. I think that there are tenets, particularly of the more natural kind. It's like humanity is, for years we know that we plant things, intentions, physical seeds when the moon is new. We harvest when the moon is full. The law of the natural world, as far as spirituality goes, has a lot more to teach us than most religions. And I think it's a matter of paying attention.
Yeah. I agree with everything you said. I mean, I might toy with the idea of being a deist, but I could just as easily, like, for me, the mythology that we're living in a simulation is just as valid as the mythology that God, the Father, and the virgin birth, and I mean, they're all mythologies. I don't see any utility in those mythologies.
Mhm.
They're interesting, like mental masturbation exercises, but not enough people know how to navigate this world. And not enough people know how to navigate this world, this plane, and the and and the disembodied nature of most spirituality. Even the light workers and the I call it pseudo spirituality. This idea that if you use the word you know lingam instead of cock, you're somehow more spiritual, or which I refuse to. I'm sorry, like yoni instead of pussy. I'm like, nah, like really, like, and the amount of spiritual bypass it's in and emotional bypass it's engaged in those communities because they refuse to deal with the down and dirty nitty gritty. Like, how do we live in fucking life? What happens when you're walking down a street? What do you notice, and how do you interact with those people who might be a threat or might not be, or and how do you treat people? How do you move through the world with grace when you're actually challenged, not in an ashram or in a church, and or as George Carlin said, I worship the sun. We don't have a building where we go every Sunday and compare our clothing, right? Like where is the real spirituality? I can tell you there's only been one church in my entire life that I've gone to where it felt like it was spiritually alive, and that was Agape in LA. And I wasn't singing with them, but when they were singing, I started crying. Like, I had tears. Like, it just felt so alive spiritually, so joyous. No, there's no other church I've been to that ever felt spiritually alive. No, no Christian church.
Mm.
And I think there's lots of anybody that wants to put something between you and God is problematic. They're if they want to put themselves out as your access to something.
Mhm.
I will say one thing on the spiritual thing. I wrote I'll post it in the comments when we're done. I actually wrote a 10,000 word article. I put it into two parts, 5,000 each. Normally, my pieces are between 700 to 15 or 700 to 1,500 words. This one was 10,000, 5,000 in each part. And the title of it was is your relationship to God getting in your relationship with God? And it was my attempt to unravel any attachment to an anthropomorphic view or which religion you belong to is the right one. Like, forget about that. Let's deal with the universal spiritual principles that they all pretty much say, don't fuck with people. Right? Like,
Don't be a dick.
don't be, yeah. Like, don't do these obvious things. But the idea that we're sort of laying up our treasures in heaven, or that this can't be heaven right now, or your own hell right now, I think is problematic. I
Oh,
don't
that's
know.
a
Not
good
anymore.
one. Contentious question for many people. Do you see anything wrong or bastardizing about charging money in exchange for spiritual advice guidance? Does this monetary exchange debase the purity and beauty of the spiritual realms? Fuck no, because the spiritual realms are directly tied with our survivability on this planet, or they are impractical and phenomena based instead of being living solutions. Do I have a problem with people hanging plaques calling themselves shaman after they've had a week of training and digging people into deeper psychological trenches than they're practically trained to fucking be able to do? Yes, yes, I do. I have a very big problem with that. That's not charging money for your spiritual gifts. That's charlatanism.
Yeah, I'm gonna take that one too. And then this next question, or actually, were you finished there? Do you have more?
Well, I mean, I think I mean, this is a big thing with the coaching too, right, Jason? Like anybody can get a coaching certification and can start charging money as a coach,
Oh God.
right?
Yeah.
Like we could growl on and on about that one. But
Right.
what you should be charging for is a reproducible skill set. And if you don't have that, then you should go out and get more fucking training until you do. And if you have these sort of innate spiritual gifts but are not skillful at expressing them and transmuting them, then you should sit with them and wait and fucking let life carve you out a little bit more and become a little bit more fucking humble and a little bit more of a hollow bone for spirit, so that you have actual reproducible skill sets rather than magical thinking and special unique services that people can't actually learn and teach themselves and benefit from. I think we're charging, some of us as guides and teachers. I have been professionally doing this for almost 20 years. I've been raised in it my entire fucking life.
Yeah.
I started out as a massage therapist, so I had a skill set. I had a physical skill set that I could charge monetary exchange for. And as I worked within that skill set, I developed other skill sets. I got certified in hypnotherapy and NLP. I went on to teach. I've been developing and learning for years. And I don't teach anything to anyone that I myself cannot say that I deeply physically embody. And I don't teach anything, and I won't offer anything session-wise that is not actually a skill set that they themselves cannot learn and reproduce. If they want to keep coming back to me to practice that skill set with me, more fucking power to them, because I'm all about building also long-term relationships. This is one of the ways that Jason and I differ in the way that we work together. I have people I've worked with for years, because we've been building this bridge between their internal world and their external world together. But it's a matter of staying in integrity as a professional with your skill sets.
So, agree with everything you said. And the one piece, I don't disagree with it. It's just not my style. And if I did work with somebody, a second time, it would be, we would do new outcomes. They would be a fresh set of outcomes. What I can't stand is the coaches who are like, well, you just sign them up for this long and you just talk about whatever comes up that week. I'm like, yeah, I mean, there's an ad hoc nature. But so I want to just track back. So can you charge for spiritual things and purity? So when those beliefs were set in place, historically speaking, you had to rape, pillage, enslave, or steal to acquire wealth. And so wealth was not spiritual. But we no longer live in those times. Now you can offer your deepest gifts to somebody, or your art, or your, whatever it is that's your deepest gift, your most spiritual thing, whether that's a painting or whether that's, the work that Justice and I like Justice and I do, or you can offer your deepest gifts to somebody in exchange for the value it creates in their life. So I view money as an indication, when you're in the service business, as an indication of the value you've brought to other people's lives. And not only can we integrate spirituality and wealth acquisition, we must, to move into the next stage, because all the financial crises, that's caused by people divorcing spirituality and money. Money's over here and my spirituality's over here. Well, if you integrated them, if you were operating spiritually, ethically, then wealth would be created spiritually, ethically. We wouldn't be having problems like the mortgage crisis when they knew they were selling junk bonds. So we just need to bring in, those old beliefs about money and spirituality being in conflict were correct at the time. But we no longer need to enslave or steal or inherit or oppress to gain wealth. We don't need to do that anymore. And we certainly don't. So that's my opinion and my philosophical views on that. In terms of mythology, thank you. In terms of mythology, the So this is the Tracy's question. Do you disagree with Joseph Campbell's view on mythology and the importance of it for our individual hero's journey through life? It's been so long since I've read Joseph Campbell, 30 years actually. What I will say is I think there's tremendous beauty in the mythopoetic themes of most religions.
That's mythopoetic. I'm sorry.
You like that?
Yes.
But they're mythopoetic themes. They're beautiful. And they teach a thing, but most people have confused the mythopoetic themes. No, just all right, a little bit the second time, with the truth. It's the story of Buddha pointing at the moon and they stare at his finger. It's like that, and most religions have dropped. Like they put all the importance of whether or not you believe in the mythology. Was the world really created in 6 days? Was Jesus really born of a biological virgin? Did Moses really part the Red Sea? Did the unicorns just not make it on the ark? I mean, I don't know. What I do know, or to go to the east, was Lao Tzu really born as a 900-year-old man who was blue? Is the earth really resting on the head of a giant serpent like the Hindus believe? No, none of that's but they're beautiful mythopoetic themes, and they were lovely. They're lovely now, and they were lovely at the time. They're just not real spirituality. And I'm personally sick of them being used as a litmus test for whether or not you're spiritual or not. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. It might not have been Joseph, but somebody, either that or the Holy Ghost was a little rapey. Oh my God!
So has been misinterpreted for the purpose of colonization. I mean, there's that component,
or made up. I mean, the number of I think there's 10 cases of some religion, smaller ones certainly, but and less of the savior or prophet had a J in the first name, had a biologically virgin birth. There's so many similarities if you look at history. It's not a new story, and so it's used to mythologize and set up the purity of the so-called prophet or leader. And I'm not saying there's not benefit to that, but my only problem with Christians is they're not very Christ-like. Like you should embody the characters and qualities of the spiritual teacher whom you follow historically. If you want to be a Buddhist, embody the qualities of Buddha. Don't worship the statue.
I personally think one of the biggest travesties is that there is actually a lack of myth in our modern society, and that myth, as it is typically understood by most people, has been reduced to the victim, martyr, savior complex, and it is extremely unhealthy as a focal point, spiritually, emotionally, or relationally. And that there are so many other stories that can enrich our humanity from a mythopoetic standpoint, but also from interrelational standpoint, and how we understand our deeper selves and our psyche and our relationship with the world, that have just been, as the whole Christian movement is wont to do, has been sort of stamped over and stamped out by that predominant mythology. And I think that's unfortunate. And it's something that I'm actually writing about in the book that I'm writing. So
yay.
Yeah, myth, meth, and mother.
I love it. What a great title. Oh my gosh. Well, I think we've covered all the, as I look at, we didn't, everything that we wanted to cover in those bullet points has been covered. Is there anything you'd like to, is there anything you'd like to say or express, or before we just talk about how people can give us money for spiritual guidance?
How they can pay This is good. We covered a lot of ground. Anything that places spirituality over survivability should, ethically be challenged and questioned. Our primary thing is to figure out how to move through this realm and this dimension, and to hopefully do it well with some skill and some style and a lot of fucking humor, because that's what it takes. If you're placing any kind of philosophy above the way that you're actually interacting here on Earth and with other people, like that, ethically, that puts that philosophy into question. That also puts your own motivations into question, and more than likely, like, whether you're engaging with a polarity coach or you're engaging with a false guru or so-called spiritual teacher, you're also going to be throwing yourself into a regression and sort of diminishing your capacity to function as a mature being in this planet. And God knows the world needs more fucking grown-ups.
Yeah.
Not a scary word. It's actually a pretty cool place to be.
Yeah, I'm gonna on the first part, I'm gonna go one step further and say anything that elevates spirituality over the material world, like the real world, isn't spiritual at all. And it's a pseudo spiritual lie, and to varying degrees. I don't know what you meant by escapism, but it's a kind of escapism. Like, well, at least heaven awaits or something, or what, like, no, right now.
And you can just climb into a giant.
Oh, yeah, and oh, damn it, I lost my all I could see now is the rocket.
I gotta write about this. It's so good. It's like, yeah.
So you can reach Justice by Illumination with Justice. I almost said through, but I didn't think anybody would get the joke. You can only get illumination through. And of course, I'm at evolutionarycompanies.com, and you can see what I'm doing there, or at the Relationships Evolved page that you're probably seeing this through. So thank you, Lady Justice. It's a pleasure as always. I'm looking forward to more and more with you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you for allowing us to be of service to you.